time for the Daily Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Planet Podcast, your weekly podcast for all things movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. I am your host, Scott Daly, and I'm joined once again by my co-host and gunslinger, Michael Grubb. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Woo! Sure am excited to deconstruct some westerns here today with you, Scott.
You are, like, scarily good at that. It's like, it really freaks me out.
Well, thank you there, sir.
Yes, Michael, you are right. We are here. We're going to talk about Godless, the new Netflix show. I talked about it very briefly on last week's episode because I had watched it then, and then you went back and watched it, and we decided there was enough here to talk about a show. But we thought, let's go back, since Godless is very clearly influenced by a lot of the classic westerns of old. We thought, let's go back and watch a couple of them, and then see if we can find exactly where those influences are. So that's what we did.
As soon as you as we started talking about comparing it to older westerns, the first thing that came to my mind was the movie Shane, which I think Godless draws very heavily upon.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And it's been a pretty big year for Shane, because Logan earlier in the year was a movie heavily influenced by Shane as well.
Right. Well, and this was written by the same person, actually, wasn't it?
It was, which makes a lot of sense.
He's got some issues with the movie Shane that he's still kind of working through.
He's trying to work through it.
He's trying to work through it.
Yeah, the other movie we went back and looked at as well was The Searchers, the John Ford, John Wayne, 1953? Something around there. A classic, considered by the American Film Institute as the best Western ever.
Yeah, I believe... I've forgotten the order now, but The Searchers and Shane came out like 1 year after each other in 53 and 54.
Yeah, some would say I think that was the height of the Western obsession in the country. Of course, the Westerns continued into the 60s and 70s. You have all the Clint Eastwood stuff as well, but this was really like the golden age, I guess, of Westerns was the early 50s, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
And it definitely heavily influenced on Godless, which we will get to. I guess we should say right ahead at the top here that we are going to get into spoilers in this podcast. I think we'll do like always, we'll just do like a general impressions thing of Godless. I've already talked about mine, but I would like to get yours. And then we'll move into spoilers, and those will be clearly marked. So if you haven't gotten to see Godless on Netflix yet, really, really recommend you do that before listening to this.
Yes, I really enjoyed Godless, even though there are a few things in this world that I enjoy.
I mean, yeah, like Michael's seal of approval is a big deal, people. I don't know if you fully understand how important that is, that if Michael likes something, it's probably pretty good, because Michael hates things.
Yes.
All right.
I can't help it.
But before we get into all that, let's talk about some news. Got some great news articles for you here, Michael. Some I'm very, very excited to talk to you about.
Okay. Hit me with the news.
An article came out in Vanity Fair on Monday, and literally I've been waiting since that article came out to talk to you about this, because it was a full cover spread all about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its mastermind, Kevin Feige. It's been 10 years since the whole Marvel experiment started, 17 films later, and it's still going strong. And the big news item here, the thing I wanted to talk to you, Michael, about, is the fact that Feige made it clear that after the 22 movies they have planned leading up to Avengers 4, the entire universe will shift. Things will change in a big way, mostly because a lot of their actors' contracts are up, and those actors have shown little interest in re-signing. They are going to shift and do something wholly new, but they have, and this, I quote, Michael, "We've got another 20 movies in the docket that are completely different from anything that's come before. Intentionally." So 20 more movies, Michael. Son of a bitch! So
I'm fine.
So how's the boycott going, buddy?
It's holding strong, and it's going to hold strong for another 20 movies. I think
it's going to be at least another decade, probably more of these movies. I mean,
I think they'll peter off before then. They've got to peter off.
I mean, like, it's interesting because we are here talking about Westerns, which were the comic book movies of their day.
Exactly.
And
and people got tired of those eventually.
And so, I mean, you're absolutely right that the day is going to come where people are not interested in these movies, and it might be coming sooner than we expect. But I am very interested, and I know we have a contentious relationship when it comes to Marvel movies, but I'm interested to see what this looks like. They've got, like they've said, like, this week, the big news this week, we got the first Avengers Infinity War trailer, the Avengers 3 movie. The full trailer came out. It's very exciting. I really thought the trailer was fantastically well done. It's a very well cut trailer, and I'm very excited for that movie. But I'm almost more excited to see what they mean by completely different from anything that's come before. Because the Marvel Comics universe is weird, and Guardians of the Galaxy is just a hint of how weird and strange things can get in this universe. And as they kind of expand and are able to take risks with this property, are they going to really dive into that stuff in new and interesting ways? And are they going to explore other genres? Because I don't know if we said this before, but superhero movies, it's not really a genre. It's just a movie with superheroes in it. You can explore genre with those elements, and I would love to see them do that.
Yeah, I mean, if they're actually going to do new things with it, then I might watch these movies. But my current fear is that they're saying that to get people excited, but they're just going to make like a new sort of Avengers formula.
Yeah, and I think it is very possible that what they mean by completely different is just
different characters.
Chris Hemsworth isn't going to be Thor anymore. Thor is going to be a woman, because in the comics Thor is a woman right now, and they're just going to shift things up like that, which, I mean, is exciting. I think it's very exciting to see different people take on these iconic characters, people of different races and different sexes and all these things, is something the comics have been really pushing, and it's been very successul for them, and I would love to see that reflected in the films as well, but that's not...
Yeah,
different.
Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't. Hopefully, they don't do the same characters. I think that's a mistake. Like with Spider-Man, like they rebooted it too quickly and too fast of a succession, and I think that hurt it. Because people still have the most recent one in mind. So if they reboot all of the characters that are there right now, I don't think that's a good decision.
Well, I don't think they would reboot it. So I don't think it would be like. If there's a new Iron Man after Avengers 4, I don't think it would be a new Tony Stark. It's like, hey, look, it's Tony Stark again, only he's a new actor. I think it would just be like a new character that possibly we already know would take up the mantle of Iron Man.
Gotcha.
And you're right. That is much more preferable than just let's reboot this guy again.
Right. Like we can't let this intellectual property die.
Right. So it would be like, instead of doing Peter Parker as Spider-Man, let's do the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man. Let's do the person in the comics who is Iron Man right now is a woman. I don't know what the character's name is, unfortunately, because I don't read a lot of comics these days.
Well, and there's a lot of superheroes that they haven't used. I mean, the Guardians of the Galaxy is a good example of taking an intellectual property that isn't really that known in the general public, and taking an interesting angle with it and making it really popular. Right. So there's like so many things they could do in that front.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they get back X-Men, because... Apparently, Michael, this isn't a news item. I just heard this through the grapevine, but the 20th Century Fox and Disney talks that had finished are back on in some capacity. So
okay, yeah,
that giant corporation melding might still happen.
Well, I mean, that'll probably be terrible, but X-Men, I've always had hope for as an idea.
Yeah, and like I want a good X-Men TV show. Because I think those characters work really, best in a serialized format.
I agree. The most interesting part of it is like seeing the mutants kind of exist in kind of mundane real world scenarios. So it'd be a great like CW series or something.
Yeah. Because you don't always have to have those huge world-ending stakes like you feel like you have to do in the third act of every one of these movies.
Right. There could be some drama centered around their like secret identities getting revealed and stuff like that.
Yeah. All right, so that's all we know, though. Still holding strong on that boycott, but I'm curious what's it going to take. Like you said, if the movies go in interesting new directions, you might consider seeing them. How far do they have to go to bring down the boycott wall?
If it's something that gets the sort of reputation of like Logan, which was clearly trying to do something different, I don't think it succeeded in escaping a traditional superhero movie enough. But it's clear that it was trying to, and that is enough for me.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I like, as much as I like Logan, I worry that Logan, like, there's a stigma on these movies still, as popular as they are, and like Logan escaped that by almost like screaming, "We're not a superhero movie, we're a Western. It's not the same." And I worry that like they're trying to run away from the genre in order to be taken seriously. And I know that's hypocritical because it's not a genre. I just literally said
exactly. That, yeah. I think what the best way to do is to put superheroes in other genres instead of just trying to do the typical, I don't even know what you'd call the normal genre. It's not quite hero's journey, but
yeah, I know what you mean. Though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is still a place for those movies. I still really do enjoy Avengers and those kind of movies when they're well constructed. But yeah, I mean, as a genre, as a type of film ages, you need to do new interesting things with it, and that is important to sustain interest in it.
Some of the new attempts, like Doctor Strange, I thought we're done in the way they've always been done. But they haven't captured the same sort of attention because everyone's seen it before.
Yeah. God, I did not like Doctor Strange at all.
Yeah, and I didn't recognize it as being that different than other of the Marvel like origin movies.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, my main complaint about the movie was I've seen Iron Man already.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's very, very similar.
Yeah, and it was a pretty movie. Like I liked all the metaphysical magic stuff, but other than that, there really wasn't, in my opinion, much going on. And I don't know.
You're tired of them. You're tired. I understand.
I'm not tired of the genre.
Let go.
Michael, I watched the Infinity War trailer 10 times since Wednesday, so I am not tired of the genre. I'm very excited for that film. I want new things. I want different things. I want the universe to feel like it's growing. And when you have movies like Doctor Strange, that's when I really start to see the seams, and I didn't like that.
Yes.
Anyway,
you've seen your own mortality.
Yeah. Let's move on to Netflix news because we're nearing the end of the year and it's show renew time. A lot of these were kind of foregone conclusions, but I think it's worth talking about them anyway. Stranger Things has officially been renewed for a third season. I don't think this is surprising at all.
Surprised? No.
But we had a whole podcast where we talked about that, and some people did not agree with our opinions. Michael, we got some comments from people that thought we were overly harsh on the series, which is weird because I think we both said it's fine. Like, and here's the things we didn't like about it, but overall it's fine.
Yeah, we just tended to talk more about the imperfections because those are the things that stick with you. Like, it could have been more.
Right. I think,
but there was a lot to appreciate. There was as well.
Steve will always be appreciated in my book.
Yeah, that's
Steve
right.
Steve needs his own spinoff. Let's just.
This is the season where Steve came into his own.
Stranger Steve. Let's just do that.
Stranger
forget
Steve.
Forget 11.
Coming new
nonsense.
to the Marvel universe.
All right. Also, Mindhunter, the show that we also did a show on, that we were very positive about that show, has been officially renewed for a second season as well. That's the David Fincher serial killer show.
They definitely left that open for another season.
Yeah, but while still leaving it satisfying at the end, I thought. It's definitely, the story is not over, but we get to a place where the character has had a clear change or realization.
The characters had a realization, and they nicely kind of completed the whole arc with that one serial killer who I forget the name of now.
Yeah, he's a real one, but the one at Kansas City, I can't remember what his name was, but yeah. Or are you talking about the one, the huge guy?
The huge guy.
Oh yeah, God, what is his name? I forgot too. Which is like that. Yeah. I think if I'm looking at a list of my favorite shows from this year, I think that's either at or very close to the top. I really, really loved that show.
It was really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's David Fincher.
Yeah. All right. So the last bit of news we have is the National Board of Review announced their 2017 honorees for the best films and filmmakers of the year. We're obviously moving into award season, and we're going to start seeing these awards given out. The best film from the National Board of Review, Michael, is The Post, which is the Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, Washington Post, Pentagon paper story that's not even out yet.
It's not even out yet.
None of us have seen it, but the critics have, and they like it, obviously. So
it seems like one of those movies that's definitely chasing an Oscar. I mentioned that it's basically the same premise for a story as Spotlight, except over a different scandal. It is and it isn't. Yeah, I mean, like, Spotlight was specifically about the power of an investigative journalism. This is more about the importance of press in general and freedom of the press, as the government was basically threatening to throw all these people in jail if they posted the story, and how they dealt with that, which is timely as hell. I don't know if Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep knew what was going to happen in 2017 when they decided to embark on this project, but it's very, very timely, it seems. The importance of the press is in the forefront of most people's mind in our country right now. I predict many more movies about the press in the next few years.
I think you're right. And if they're directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep, I'm in. They, by the way, won Best Actor and Best Actress, the two of them. And Best Director was
for the
Greta
National
Gerwig
Board of Review.
for Lady Bird.
Yeah,
which
I still want to see that after your recommendation last week.
Yeah, I guess it's set a record on Rotten Tomatoes. It is the best reviewed film on Rotten Tomatoes in the history of the website. It has 100% with over 170 reviews in, so that's pretty amazing.
Huh? A movie that everyone likes.
Yeah, usually you get some contradictory people like you to go in there and
see if it stands up to the Michael test.
Yeah. It's a very good movie. It's very well directed, so very, very great honor. They always list their top 10 films of the year, and there were some interesting ones on here. Some ones that I'm not surprised, and some ones I'm very surprised about. So, Baby Driver. These are just in alphabetical order, I think. So, Baby Driver, a movie we both really liked.
It's probably going to get some downvotes due to the Kevin Spacey controversy this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. You know, it's tough. Like, I haven't watched the movie since all this Kevin Spacey stuff, but I do remember there's lines in that movie. Like, Kevin Spacey finds this guy as a little kid that tries to steal from him and then employs him that just like in context of everything we know now are just icky. And it's still a wonderful film. I still think people should hold it up as one of the best of the year. I certainly will. But yeah, it's unfortunate that it has this taint on it now.
You shouldn't hold that against it. It's just that it's a little bit hard not to think about the controversy when you see Kevin Spacey in the movie.
Exactly. The other ones are Call Me By Your Name, a film I have not seen yet. The Disaster Artist, which is coming out next week. I'm very excited to see that. The most surprising one on here was Downsizing, which is the Alexander Payne Matt Damon film about people shrinking themselves. I saw this at Fantastic Fest back in September and hated it, so I think it's a really bad movie. I was very surprised to find it on this list.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Dunkirk, The Florida Project, Get Out, Lady Bird, Logan, and Phantom Thread rounded out the rest of the top 10. Some of those aren't out yet, but pretty good list, except for Downsizing.
Yeah, I never saw Get Out, but I know it's been getting a lot of accolades. Yeah, you need to see that
movie. I think you'd enjoy what it's trying to do.
Yeah, it seems interesting.
All right, that's it. That's it for us for news. Let's talk, Michael, about Godless.
Let's talk about Godless.
Yeah, so talk to me about your overall impression of Godless. What did you think about this series? And then we'll kind of get into the weeds a little bit with spoilers after that.
I thought it was really great and really honest. It wasn't trying to do a dark modern reconstruction of a or deconstruction of a Western. It was more of a reconstruction of a Western, which is words that you said to me in a G chat, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's using a lot of a lot of elements from previous westerns that are in danger of becoming tropes, but they're paid the proper amount of respect that it's just really enjoyable and told through a narrative that is really well done and with really good characters that are explored just as much as they should be explored.
Yeah.
So I really liked it.
I completely agree with you, and I think one of the things it's doing is taking a lot of the problematic elements of the westerns that we're going to be talking about today, the older westerns, and updating them to our sensibility and our modern sense of what is acceptable and what isn't. This show puts women to the forefront more than any Western I've really ever seen. They are important characters who, like, I think if you take the women in Shane and the women in The Searchers and compare them to the women in this show, it's night and day. They are mostly relegated to sitting around being frustrated at the men waiting back in a house, where in this they have agency, they take control of things themselves. The action that's involved with the women is like nothing you've really seen in a Western before.
Right.
And I think
they were treated well. It wasn't like a reimagining of the West where like suddenly the women were given more respect by the other characters than they probably would have. Like they were still treated as women. It's just that they showed that they were, fully capable humans and they were toughened by their experiences.
Right. And I think it did the same thing with Black people. I think it did the same thing with Native Americans as well. It showed them, honestly, it showed them the way that they would have been considered in this time, but it gave those characters agency and importance and treated them like human beings. The characters in the show didn't necessarily, but the show itself did. And I think that's something that, a lot of these 50 Westerns it's very easy to pull out moments where we're very racially insensitive. Of course, that was just a sign of the time. So it's like, it's almost as if this show set out to specifically take everything that was great about Westerns and bring it to the modern audience, and then fix the bad stuff about it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I noticed the most was an increase in, like, the characters were characterized in a more nuanced way. And one thing I noticed when I was watching Shane and The Searchers is that there used to be much less expectation on, like, explaining your characters, on, like, giving them a backstory and giving them nuance. For instance, in The Searchers, so perhaps I guess we just get into spoilers. Maybe we should make that announcement.
Yeah. We're moving into spoilers from now on. If you haven't watched Godless yet, stop it. Go watch it. It's only 7 episodes.
Go watch it, especially if you like Westerns.
Yeah, do it.
So The Searchers is a movie about this old Confederate, not super old, but John Wayne is a former Confederate soldier, and he goes home to his family, or not. He's the uncle of this family, and while he's off tracking some Comanches, they attack and kill most of his family and abduct his nieces. And then the movie is him kind of trying to get them back and more get revenge alongside his sort of adopted nephew. But the main thing that is interesting about his character is the character is a lot more motivated by revenge and hate than by saving the nieces.
Right.
His adopted nephew is the kind of grounding character who is concerned about, is the moral compass of, no, what's important here is that we get, the nieces back. And John Wayne's character doesn't seem to care about that. However, I would argue that his character is a little bit of a one-note thing. Like, basically, that's just repeated all the way, is that he's kind of ornery and unreasonable and kind of obsessed with this thing until the end, where he shows that he shows some compassion for his niece finally. Yeah. But none of the characters are really super well explored, even the main ones.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I think this goes into what you were talking about before, that the backstory of these characters is not explicitly told to you. John Wayne's Ethan Edwards, we know he's a Confederate soldier. We know he's coming back. We know he has a strange amount of gold that is never really explained.
It's never explained. Yeah. It's like specifically mentioned as being like, this gold is new and unmarked.
Yeah.
And he's like, yep.
Yeah.
And we don't know. I don't even know what that implies, really. Does that imply he stole it from a bank?
Yeah. And that's like, we have a character who is coming back from a conflict he lost. He lost a civil war. He failed. And like 3 years ago, so he's just been wandering for 3 years trying to search for his purpose. And he comes back to this family and is immediately thrown on another quest to find these girls and take revenge. And it's almost like he's obsessive with it. Like this goes on for 5 years, I think, is the total time it takes them to track down these Indians and find Debbie, his niece that was captured. And like, it just shows like he can't give up on it. He won't give up. He's obsessed with it. And when you think about his backstory with this, the parts of his backstory, with the Civil War, that kind of makes sense, because like he's a person that like doesn't want to lose something else, doesn't want to come back empty-handed, doesn't know where they belong in a world after losing stuff. So they're just completely 100% dedicated to the mission. And I love his character in this story. I really do.
Right. But I think it's more, very little of it is told or shown to you. Like, you have to do a lot of imagining for the character, which is fine. I think that's it's definitely can be a very good way to do it, because the viewers do have imaginations and they can fill in stuff, and that can be part of a really great way to have the audience connect more with the story, is if they're filling stuff in.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that it's definitely not told. I think some of it is shown. I think John Wayne's a very good actor, and
it's shown through his attitude. I think.
Yeah, it's shown through his performance and how he talks and how he holds himself and how he reacts to different things. It is very subtle. You're absolutely right, but and it is very different. Like that's one thing. Like we have to. I think we both realize this, that movies in the 50s are made differently than movies are today. So Godless looks and feels very different from The Searchers and very different from Shane. Because it's a different type of movie making. It's different types of performances. But there is some, like, I really adore this film. I really do. I like just about everything about it, except for maybe some of our problematic portions. The depiction of Indians in this film is not great. Not great.
It's not great. I mean, you have to look at it through the lens of the time,
right.
And I think John Ford has stated, like you said, that what he was actually trying to do is humanize the Native Americans a little bit, because the motivation of the villain is that, white men killed his sons, and so he's also getting revenge in a similar way to John Wayne.
Yeah.
But I would say that doesn't so much come across in the movie, because they're just treated as these like whooping, like non-human characters most of the time.
Yeah, it very much is lip service. Like, it's just that one conversation with Chief Scar where he says that. The movie is not told from the Native point of view. We never really see them as people, except for that one like 5-second scene.
Right. And so they start talking about this in terms of like how the characters are explained. Also in the movie Shane, which starts off with this like stranger coming to work on a ranch with this family, and it's kind of implied that he has some sort of gunslinging past by how he like reacts to loud noises and stuff. But you're never told anything about, like, was he actually a criminal?
Right.
Where did he come from? What has he done? You're never told any of that. It's just completely mysterious that he's this kind of gunslinger guy.
And that again, is never answered. All we get in Shane is that a person with his past, his nebulous, mysterious, violent, possibly past, cannot exist in a changing world. Which is like, I love Shane a lot too. I hadn't seen that movie in a long time, and the message of how to survive in a world that's changing is just really wonderful, and I think very timely for the 50. I think it was 54 or something when it came out. It was 56 or 57 actually, but it's a good movie too, Michael.
Yeah, and so So getting to Godless then.
Yeah, the movie the show we're here to talk about. That one. I forgot. I remember.
Godless opens in a very similar way to Shane, actually. They're in this ranch, although it's nighttime, and the stranger approaches, and right away we kind of see the difference in tone, where in this kind of more realistic Western, the world is a dangerous place, and this ranch is inhabited by a woman named Alice Fletcher and her son, and the son's and I guess her mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And so their response is they make themselves known and tell the guy to announce himself. He can't because he's already injured, and so she just shoots him.
Yep.
And then they kind of nurse him back to health, and he is revealed to be this mysterious gunslinger with a dark past.
Yeah.
In the very same way as Shane, and there's a lot of beats that are really similar between him and Alice Fletcher's son, Truckee, and Shane and the son of the family, little Joey, because they both of the children kind of look up to the gunslinger with this fascination, and like they want to be gunslingers too, and in both situations, Shane / Roy Good is the gunslinger in Godless, discourage that. They're like, you should never take another man's life unless you need to.
Yeah, they acknowledge that doing that like fundamentally changes you as a human being. And
right.
it is a very similar thread between the two of them. The thing that I want to draw you to here, specifically in this opening, is Michelle Dockery as Alice Fletcher. And the thing that when we said about, like, I was watching Shane with this story in mind, and like Shane opens and the wife in that story is like, throughout the entire scene where Shane slowly walks up to their farm, she's like hiding in the house, and like you can only see half her face because she's like barely poking her face out the window because she's like terrified of this stranger in their land. And you contrast with this, where it's Alice Fletcher herself who is storming outside, who is pulling the gun and indeed pulling the trigger on the stranger in her house. And I think that is a good representation of the differences in this is what a Western in the 21st century looks like versus a one from 1953. And I think that's a really great way of tone setting. Like, this is going to be a different kind of story. Like, we're declaring it. And it's really great.
Yeah, that's the first sign. And how they treat Roy Good's character too, instead of just leaving the mystery as a mystery of where he comes from, it's gradually explained and used in the narrative as like something,
right?
As something that this character needs to overcome as part of his arc.
Yeah.
Whereas I would say Shane had less of an arc personally. I guess his arc, I would say Shane's arc was more of maybe he thought he could live like a normal life, and then he kind of found out he couldn't, or something like that. It's not super solid, because it's like, well, now the conflict's taken care of, so you actually could. but
well, I think his was, he realized he couldn't change, and like where he's going to go, violence and destruction are just going to follow him, and so he can't live this normal, safe life. Like the guns, like tell your mom there are no more guns in the valley is the famous quote from the story, and the one I had forgotten about was when the woman says to him, is like, I'd be much happier if there were no more guns in the valley, including yours. Right. And I think but like the including yours part is the part I forgot about. And it was like, oh yeah, like Shane, you can't, like you're incapable of being this person.
That's a good like 50s era message, but the movie kind of undermines itself, because if Shane wasn't there, then like all of their houses would have been caught on fire and stuff, right? Like, he's clearly in the right with what he's doing in that movie.
Yeah, I think the movie kind of, to me, says there is a purpose in the world for people like this, but they don't get to have the peaceful, safe family life that he saw with these people.
I think just looking at it through a modern perspective, though, it's harder to understand that, because like my takeaway would have been like, what Shane should do is become the sheriff of this town, because they've mentioned that there's no law for like 3 days ride, and that to me seems like the obvious like everyone wins scenario.
Yeah, I mean that's not
but
wrong.
Yeah, but clearly there's like a message they're going for, and it's kind of like an older perspective on looking at things, and they're trying to tell a good like nonviolent message and stuff.
Speaking of not explicitly stated, you know what I was surprised on my revisit of Shane? The barely subtextual attraction between Shane and the man's wife that is like there almost in every scene, right? Like there's a very serious inkling that they are super attracted to each other. They
were clearly afraid to make that too explicit because it's super subtle.
Yeah.
But there are things like when she I forget exactly what maybe this is when he's going to town to confront people, but she's like, "Are you doing this for me, Shane?" And he's like, "No, I'm doing it for you and little Joey and everyone." But
then like you get the idea that I think it was Joe was the name of the husband, Joe Starrett.
Yeah.
Who says like, if I die, I know you'll be taken care of. And there's some subtext there that he sees the attraction between the two of them. Like there's when they're dancing, right? And
the scene
they're
where
dancing
they're dancing,
together, and it's
right?
like this really kind of
and that
almost
that
uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the more interesting things that happened though, because there's not a lot of like character interactions in these old westerns, really. Like most of it is I would say Shane's interaction with the boy is the focus of the film.
I would say you're right. Yeah.
And he has a pretty honest interaction with Joe Starrett, but Joe Starrett isn't much of a character. He's just kind of like the good person.
Right. Yeah.
And none of the interactions between like the other characters really ever go very deep. Like you see one of the bad were they the Rikers? Was that the family? I don't remember.
Yes.
But one of the henchmen's kind of like had a change of heart at the end.
Right.
But that was really just kind of thrown in there. Like he wasn't even a character really. Previously in the movie, except that he started a fight with Shane, and they got some respect for each other by going at it with the fisticuffs, which is another theme in westerns, right?
Right.
Like, that seems to happen a lot, is where two characters will like get into fisticuffs and then like break it off and shake hands and be like, "I respect you more now."
Yep. Yeah.
It happened to the Searchers as well.
Yeah, it did.
The wedding at the end.
So moving it back to Godless, I think the contrast here is pretty clear that whereas those shows did not want to explicitly dive into the past of their main characters, I think Godless spends a lot of time exploring the history of every single one of these characters. Where did they come from?
Right.
What brought them to be the person they are now? And how is that going to affect their ability to change and grow going forward is a main focal point of this show.
And it's actually all connected. Like, while it's just kind of implied that, like, violence follows Shane, like, none of his previous violent acts have actually followed him here.
Yeah.
In this movie, like, Roy Good is actually being hunted, and he's actually bringing violence to this town by being there.
I was kind of waiting for that, and I think it's just because I had Godless on my mind. It had been so long since I've seen Shane. I was, in the back of my head, I guess I just retconned it that the violence that comes to the valley is part of Shane's past, and no, that is not the case. But yeah, you're right. It is explicitly in Godless. Roy Good is bringing violent people to this town of LaBelle that is not prepared for it at all.
I think that's an example of a modern storytelling improvement, whereas like something that could have easily been in the original Shane, but we haven't had like the 60 years of experience in storytelling in these kind of genres to realize that you could like improve the movie by adding connections between the ideas instead of just having them be disconnected.
The other both The Searchers and Shane are movies based on books, and I've never read either of those novels, and I wonder if that kind of stuff is put in the books, if there's A, more backstory, and B, more connection there.
I haven't read them either, but I kind of doubt it, because the Western books of the time were sort of the low end, like kind of equivalent to the Harlequin romances.
Yeah.
Like trashy kind of books for people.
I wonder, like, I see your point in Shane, and I do very much like the fact that Roy Good is directly responsible for bringing violence to this town, but I kind of see in Shane that the fact that it's nothing specifically related to his past kind of works in that theme a little more. That the fact that like it doesn't matter, like it's not even his past chasing him. It's just
because Shane is completely unsullied.
Right.
Like he's always been a hero as far as we're concerned. Like it just kind of tells you that he's a gunslinger, which isn't necessarily evil even.
Right. But in the changing world, the new world does not have a place for him anymore. As the world changes, as like outlawing and like one of the messages of Shane is that like that we repeat over and over again is like there's laws against killing now. Like there's laws against using guns. You can't just shoot people you don't like anymore. And that hasn't quite gotten here yet. So Shane is still needed in these dying moments of the outlaw Old West to do something, but it's going to go away. Like the future is coming and there's no place in this world for Shane.
Right. Another parallel between Shane and Roy Good and Godless is the scene where Shane goes into town to pick up some wire for the family, and he goes into the bar to get a soda pop for the kid, and you know the hooligan comes up to him and throws a glass of whiskey on him, and he just takes it, and this like bothers the boy that he didn't stand up for himself. And the same thing happens in Godless, where Roy Good is out with the boy, and the bully men come up to them and spit on them, and he's just like kind of takes it, and the boy is bothered by this as well, and there's a similar goal of like, you know, you shouldn't just like react violently to bullies.
Yeah, like
sometimes
they just
you
escalate conflict. Yeah,
right,
and you haven't seen. You're a kid. You haven't seen what the end point of this fight looks like. You haven't seen the consequences of that. I have. Listen to me. Yeah, I like that a lot. You're absolutely right. The entire interaction between those two characters is right out of Shane. It's like so much homage that it's almost just stealing. But I really like it though. I really like it.
So let's talk about the villains.
Okay.
Because I think there are definitely some mirrors between Jeff Daniels' Frank Griffin, who is the leader of the outlaw gang bad guys in this movie, and again, I think it's the Rikers.
I think
the criminal gang in Shane. They're both kind of these old paternal figures who lead this kind of like family. One is a literal family, and one is a kind of fabricated family. And in this, again, in Godless, there's this explicit connection between him and Roy, which improves things a little bit. But there's a lot of similarities. And again, Frank Griffin in Godless is explored way more than Riker in Shane. There is a really good scene in Shane where he kind of explains himself, where he's like, I was here, you know, settling this area. You've cut off my water for my cattle by homesteading here. That's not fair.
Yeah.
Is it? And that's like the only kind of place where he's explained as just a not like pure evil villain who's being mean to these people. Like it kind of gives him a little bit of, you can kind of understand him or fill in some gaps from that.
Yeah, you're right. I love that scene. Yeah.
But in Frank Griffin in Godless he's almost like one of the main characters. He's probably one of the two main characters of the show, and he's a really good character that has a lot of depth to him.
Oh, he's fascinating.
Like sufficiently unhinged as to be a terrifying villain, but also like likable in a lot of scenes.
Yeah, and you understand how he got the way he did. Like his story about what happened to his family is horrifying. And like you get to a point where you understand a kid that was raised like this, how they took this ideology of family and it warped into this terrible, cruel thing that he has, and why it would hurt him so much when Roy abandons this.
Right. Yeah. It's really interesting how he mirrors this. He adopts all these children basically into his outlaw family, and he actually cares about them.
Yeah. He's not the kind of villain who would like just casually shoot his own man if he pissed him off or anything. Like these are important people to him.
Right. I mean, there's a couple things that kind of undermine that. I guess in the last scene, I felt there's a lot of things I felt that could have been improved about the last episode, basically, that I think you disagreed with me with. But one of them was like when there's the big fight at the end between the gang and all of the women in town. and all of his gang are just being like shot all around him. It doesn't seem like he really cares.
Yeah.
Whereas this is his family, and I like believed that he does care about them. You know.
Yeah, I think I understand that. Seeing a little more emotion from him in that scene maybe would have been good. I think, you know, the argument against that is by this point he's just like in an uproar.
He's obsessed.
Like he's
obsessed with this revenge, and he's got all of these kind of like messiah complex maybes of like he keeps repeating throughout the movie like, this is, I've seen my death. This isn't where I die. I have a purpose and stuff like that.
Right.
But
I did like how subtly we established that how much these people really love him though. There were some specific moments like when Roy Good does shoot him in that standoff where he's hiding behind the dead horse, like they kind of like rush to him, right? They like rush to cover him in that moment.
Right. And he specifically like he's going to kill him.
Yeah.
Roy Good, but this is still his father figure, so he just shoots him in the arm.
Right.
And at first it's like, well, why would he do that? That's dumb. But you definitely buy it by the end after their relationship is explained a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think one of the Shane parallels here as well is the impact of violence. I read that one of the things that they really wanted to do in Shane, one of the things that George Stevens, the director, specifically set out to do was to show how powerful and violent the guns were. So they like the sound effect for the gun was like,
it was like a massive cannon.
Yeah.
And people went flying like 7 feet when they got hit,
and that was all deliberate. And that kind of started the idea of westerns like not hiding the violence, not trying to glorify the violence, but really pay it off in a meaningful way. And that is something that you absolutely see in Godless. Like it is a very violent show. Like the movie starts with Jeff Daniels like arm like from that gun wound like basically hanging off and having to be cut off. Like the opening, the soft opening to the show is those people dead and massacred by that train.
There's a great scene where Sam Waterston's character, who is the marshal of the area, is like leading a posse to this town, which has, you find out later, has sent like a telegram asking for help because they're being attacked. But yeah, he goes in and he sees like all the bodies, and then he kind of like drops to his knees in a really great way as it like zooms out, and you see like the hanging shot child from a post, and it's a great scene for introducing his character as kind of like this heroic marshal who's just abhors all of this violence and is now going to seek out this villain Frank Griffin and give him the justice that he deserves and so forth.
Yeah, let's talk about him, because I think he is another example of how this show really recontextualizes a lot of the standard Western tropes, because he doesn't make it.
He doesn't make it, and we were both super shocked by that. They kind of, they show him every once in a while in the series, kind of on his journey following Frank Griffin, and like he's going to basically get the local cavalry brigade or whatever to help him hunt down this super violent group who's pretty powerful at this point. And then he just walks into this bar, which is completely dark, which immediately you're like, uh-oh, something bad's going to happen. Orders a drink, and then the lights come on, and you see Frank Griffin's behind him, and you're like, ooh, how's this gonna? And then he just gets shot. And the message here, which is really great, is like, no one has plot armor. Like, no matter how good you are, you don't deserve to live. That's not what this is about. Like, you can die.
Yeah, and you described it as Game of Thronesian almost, because it's just so shocking and different from what was expected.
Well, it's exactly the same as Ned Stark, where he's like the main character. He's full of honor. He always does the right thing, so of course he's not going to be punished for it. But he gets his head cut off, and the point of that is to shock you into realizing that this is a world and not just a story.
Yeah,
where anything can happen, and it doesn't have to be dramatic. And that's exactly what happens here, where he doesn't get to do anything cool. He doesn't get to say anything. he just gets shot and his quest is over.
Yeah, it's not a heroic death. It's not like he was like, it's not the showdown at noon type of death. It's just meaningless and non-heroic and brutal and sad. And
it was great. It was super effective at reframing the rest of the story, where you're like, well, anything can happen now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they do that again later with another character.
Yeah, do you want to get into that? Because I think that's the real point of contention between the two of us, I guess, is with Scoot McNairy's character.
Well, I wasn't referring to him, actually.
Not?
I was referring to Whitey.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
So Whitey is the deputy in the town who's this young guy. He's a show-off, but quite likable. I really liked his character.
Yeah, I mean, he's in love with the black woman, and I think it's, what's the name? Is it like Negroville is the name of the town?
Blackdom
or something. Yeah, some like this group of freed. I think this is post Civil War, right? Yeah. This group of black people have formed their own town, kind of outside our main town of LaBelle, and they're understandably very closed in. But Whitey, is in love with the woman of one of the fathers of this town, and so we get to see their relationship kind of grow over the course of the show.
This town has this great aura surrounding it by like, because this isn't just like escaped slaves. This was like a super brutal like brigade,
right? Yeah,
of black soldiers from the war who have this whole mystique around them of being like super scary soldiers, and like the outlaws are even afraid that they'll intervene when they attack the town and stuff. And and it gives this great feeling to like of kind of dread, like when Whitey like goes there and so forth. And the characters over there are really, even though they're not given a lot of screen time, there's a lot of, you imagine a lot of great things for them based on the backstory that surrounds them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we'll get into it, but the showdown that happens in that town, in that room is wonderful and like tragic based on what you understand of these characters. And yeah, their war record and the fact that they did these things and then fought for their freedom, won, and established this town where they could be left alone to do what they wanted to do, and then
and they're never left alone.
The rest comes to them, and they are forced to fight once again. Yeah, it's great. But yeah, Whitey. Sorry,
but Whitey, he's shown to be a skilled gunfighter, and you kind of always are waiting throughout the movie for him to have some like super awesome shootout, and like be a hero, which is what he wants to be. But at the very end, when he's putting on his belts and he's like about to saunter out into town like he did earlier to drive off some bandits, and like stand up and be righteous, and he opens the door and he just gets like a knife gets thrown into his chest and he dies. And it's like, no, that's not the ending he deserved. Right. But it again reinforces the like, it doesn't matter like how main the character is and how much you like them, like they can still just die.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about some of the women, because we haven't like that's the one complaint I had was with the marketing of this show that billed this as a story about these women, and they're very much front and center in it, but it's definitely they're not necessarily the main characters, but their town and what's happened to the town is the main conflict. Yeah, which is something we haven't specifically said, but if you're listening to this, I assume you've seen it. But this is a town where all the men are dead, and I think it's just the sheriff and Whitey, and some more men come from out of town to take advantage of it. I think the bartender at the saloon is a man.
There's a couple old men who weren't working in the mines, but basically everyone died because this is a mining town and there was some explosion in the mines and like all the working men were killed. Yeah,
so Mary Agnes, who is the wife of the mayor, who so kind of like default takes control of everything in the town, is played by Merritt Weaver. I loved this character. I want to hear what you have to say about her. And there's really nothing we can compare to Shane and the Searchers here, except like to say, like, look at this badass character and how none of the women in those movies are even close to this character.
Yeah, that's just to make sure we're talking about the same character. That's the sheriff's sister.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. She was an awesome character. She was, I think, one thing that kind of, eventually annoys me is when they sort of like ham-fistedly try to make like a competent female character, but they always like dress her in something like unnecessarily sexy, and like everyone desires her sexually, but she's also like, an awesome shot or something. Yeah. This was just a character who happened to be a woman, but was just like a very super competent and human character who was done well.
Yeah, and she's like barely closeted lesbian. I mean, like not
right.
really even hiding it anymore. Is like
she wears like her old husband's clothes,
right. And she's in love with the school teacher, or the prostitute turned school teacher. What was her name? I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
It's not that important. But yeah, so she barely closeted, like seems to be smarter than
Callie Dunn.
Huh?
Yeah. Callie Dunn.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Her name.
Seems to be smarter than just about everyone else in this town. Seems to know exactly what they need and what to do, and of course nobody listens to her. But yeah, really great character. I really liked her arc. The only part of her I didn't like, I liked her relationship with the school teacher very much. I didn't like the rom-com-esque comedy of errors thing we did, or like she thinks that she's being cheated on with the other.
I enjoyed it just because of her reactions to it.
Yeah, she made the material fun, but
right. Well, it made it fun, and it showed some vulnerability in her because she was very tough.
Yeah.
And she put on an air like she didn't care, and so the way she responded to this was to sort of to lash out. But what I really liked was when she realized that it was all a misunderstanding, she just kind of like rolls her eyes and is like, oh, well, shit.
Yeah. It's executed very well, but it is one of those conflicts that is literally just, if these two people just talked to each other for 30 seconds, everything would have been solved.
That can always be frustrating. Yeah. But I think she was a good enough actress that she sold it.
Yeah, no,
her performance was probably the best in this.
I totally agree.
Of all the characters in this show, because she had the most things she conveyed.
Yeah, I completely agree. And she's a badass woman who, is not. You're absolutely right that it is not trying to do the badass woman that we see so often in action films, where she's like dressed in tight leather and like doing like every single fucking Underworld and Resident Evil film. It's such a better character than that.
Yeah. And she has this great like maternalistic relationship with Whitey as well.
Yeah.
Which is enjoyable to witness.
And that is something that I think that this show does very well, that you've hinted at it before, that everything is related. All this stuff is like a puzzle that's interlocking with each other. Everyone knows everyone. And it really feels like you get to understand the town of LaBelle. This feels like a real town because everyone has a relationship with everyone. Everyone knows people. Like she helps with her brother's kids. She is also at the same time taking care of Whitey, who is kind of left alone because he has no one. Did they ever say what happened to his parents or anything? I mean,
well, they showed in one of the flashbacks his dad, father going into the mine.
Yeah,
but yeah, and that's something that I think is kind of a modern improvement of old westerns, because it wasn't as standard to have every character have relationships with every other character. And most of the older movie styles were more like you focus on the main characters and other characters sort of serve as tools through which the main character can do things.
Yeah.
And I think now there's an expectation that everyone needs to be a full character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what they applied to this, and it worked really well, and it made this Western world seem much more of a world than some previous ones.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that like you hear that this was going to be just a 2-hour film, and then no one would make it because who makes Westerns anymore? That's apparently what Scott Frank struggled with. He had this idea for years and years, apparently, and nobody would make it. And then finally, Netflix said, well, can you make it into a show? And he said, yeah, I can do that. And he did it. And I think that's what I think TV can get to more than films can sometimes, that we have time to explore even the smallest character and understand them.
If I would normally be super skeptical about turning a movie into a show, because I really hate things that aren't efficiently edited.
Stranger Things.
This season of Stranger Things had some of that, I think. It wasn't as bad as some other shows, like all of the Marvel Netflix shows, I think, are just like so full of filler. Those should have been movies or something. But here I didn't notice it at all. And maybe it's just because I liked the characters so much, or maybe it was because there was actually enough plot development that needed to be done. But I think it's good it's good that it was 7 episodes and not like 15 or 12 or whatever the standard is.
I agree. They wrote the story they wanted to write, and then they ended it. And this is like not a show, really. They called it a limited series, which in today's parlance just means it's a mini series. Yeah, it won't have it won't have another season. It's just done. It's a complete like story. It's done.
It's like a 7-hour miniseries, which is something that used to come on television occasionally.
Yeah.
And doesn't really happen anymore. But this is that format, and now it's on Netflix. Is how they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what did you think about the treatment of Native Americans in this show? Because we've talked about how in Searchers it was very rough. Very, very rough, but understandable for the time. And of course, we dodged really the problem of Native American treatment by really only having 3 characters. I think there was the kid, his mother, his grandmother, and then the one guy who was following around Sheriff Bill.
And they're depicted in a few other scenes. And the first time we encounter Native Americans is when the sheriff is like trying to do like some sort of vision quest or something with some of his native friends. It's shown that the sheriff of this town has a amicable relationship with the local native people.
Right.
But and then there's also a scene where Alice Fletcher's flashback, where her group has been attacked.
Oh yeah, you're right.
She's being raped by the Native Americans. But the show treats them fairly because they're not all good and they're not all bad.
Right.
They're just humans like anyone else, and there's some that are antagonists in that scene. But then there's several main characters who are, just human characters who are good, and the little boy is a native.
Yeah, it was interesting that the decision to do like a very kind of trope-filled mother-in-law thing, but have it be a Native American mother-in-law was very interesting to me, because they're taking a lot of like those standard mother-in-law tropes, where she's like always involved and doting on the kid and like almost the comedic relief at times, but also she's a Native American, and I quite enjoyed it, actually. I thought that was an interesting thing to do.
She was a good character. She was kind of on the edge of being like a stereotype of like a shamanistic.
Yeah, it got very close. It did walk that line.
But I think it ultimately did it very respectfully, and she was a good character who you liked.
Yeah.
And, so yeah, I think it handled it well.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Scoot. Let's talk about Scoot McNairy and Bill McNew, because besides the Roy Good, Frank Griffin conflict, I think Sheriff Bill McNew is one of the other really main characters of the story, and we haven't really talked about him yet.
Right. He kind of was and he kind of wasn't. Like, you thought he was going to be.
He disappeared for a lot of the show. And if that's one complaint I have, that like maybe if it was in like one long movie format, I wouldn't noticed it as well, but there's episodes where he's just not there, and like you understand like he's on this quest, but he just kind of disappears from the plot for a long time sometimes, and I just like what happened to Bill? Like, is he okay? Like, where is he?
He was the character that I thought had the most missed opportunities. Like, I still liked him as a character, and I don't feel like his arc was completely mauled or anything, but his storyline was the least tight, and I felt like there were a lot of things they kind of introduced for him that they didn't really take advantage of.
Yeah, it almost seems superfluous, right? I think his performance is really great, but if you remove him from the story, I don't think it dramatically changes that much of it.
It doesn't change it at all, I would say. Yeah. I mean, He seems like he's going to be important. He's the sheriff of this town that people don't respect. They call him a coward. and it's revealed that the reason for this is that he's going blind, and so he doesn't draw his weapon, presumably because he doesn't want to just shoot someone.
And he keeps running away from conflict because he can't see. Yeah. And he's forcing Whitey, the young, arrogant kid, to do his job, basically.
Right. But we had some disagreements about exactly how much of this blindness was an excuse and how much of it was actually there.
Yeah, and I think that was just a disconnect in our conversation, because he is very much going blind. That is something that is happening.
He's definitely going blind.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's so. There's this important scene, I think, early, where these two kind of cowboys come into town who are like making a ruckus, and they need to be driven off. But they're mostly harmless. But it's just like it's narratively, it's an excuse to have a scene where they need to be confronted by the sheriff. And Bill McNew, the sheriff, strolls out into the street to confront them. And so I think by that, it's showing that he's not running away from this conflict. Like, this is his job and he's going to do it. But then he stumbles while he's approaching them because he trips because he's blind or whatever. And everyone laughs at him. And then that's when Whitey comes out and kind of like rescues him, and twirls his guns around and like shoots one of them in the arm, and then coolly steps back in because he likes to make a show of things. So I interpret the scene as like he still is trying to do the right thing, but he's realizing that he's like aging and going blind, and he can't anymore, and that bothers him that he's not useful.
Yeah, and I think I don't disagree that that's part of it, but I think the main arc for the character, I feel, is he's a man who has lost his wife, who can't get over it. Like, we see that in his very first scene. He's talking to the grave of his wife. He says specifically, I'm sorry, I blame her, meaning his daughter, for your death. So I guess she died in childbirth is what we're supposed to take from that. And I can't get over that. And the Indian man says to him that you've lost your shadow. So he's kind of doesn't have a place anymore, and he's trying to figure out what his place and what his purpose is, and he's like literally fading from existence on this.
Right. And that was an important statement, because that actually comes back later. I didn't know they were going to use that, but they did, and that was a great way to bring it full circle.
Yeah, no,
the shadow
it was wonderful. Yeah, and so I think he's a man that's like lost in the world and looking for purpose, and while he's looking for purpose, he also is losing his sight. So he thinks, I can't even be the sheriff anymore, like, because I am losing my vision. I have no place on this world anymore. And he sees as chasing down Frank Griffin as this heroic last thing he can do. He's probably like, he knows he's going on a suicide mission. This is like the last thing I can do before I become completely useless, because I have no place on this world. And he's kind of, in my opinion, like, and I know you disagree with, like, he leaves the town in charge of Whitey. He leaves LaBelle basically unprotected except for this kid. He leaves both of his kids in someone else's care, and he goes off on the suicide mission, desperately trying to find purpose. And the completion of that arc is when he returns to town, gets his shadow back in that really wonderful scene. God, I loved that scene so much. And then, has found his purpose again.
Before we get to that scene, there's a couple things I want to point out about the beginning, because when you were talking about, like, one of the first things that we hear him say is that he blames his daughter for the death of his wife. And immediately I thought that was going to be an important conflict, is him coming to terms with his daughter. And he really never does. Like, obviously at the end he comes back to his children. It's never implied that he's ever abandoned them or anything, but there's no even like moment where he just like specifically hugs his daughter or something. Like, the daughter's just kind of always there. And then the other thing you said about he thinks it's like a suicide mission, and that's exactly right, is that's kind of what it is, and he hasn't realized it yet. And then there's the great scene where he stumbles upon Frank Griffin in the river, and Frank Griffin basically explicitly says that. He says, a lot of people come after me because they want to, like, die a hero. Is that what you want? Do you want me to kill you? And And then I think in that moment he kind of realizes like, wait, this is really dumb.
Yeah.
why am I doing this? And so that's all a great part of his arc. But I think where it falls apart is the ending that you were just about to talk about.
Yeah, and I guess that actually, we'll get to it, but that part works for me. The part that doesn't work for me is I think you're absolutely right that he comes to this realization that I've just been doing this to kill myself, and he doesn't really change his behavior from that point on. Like if he had
exactly.
left and after realizing that immediately abandoned the mission and gone home, that would have been clear change. But he really just continues to follow him and only really heads home once he hears that Frank is heading there.
Right. And then the thing that really took me out of the last episode, like where the whole show was so realistic and the characters behaved so realistically, that I was mostly not aware I was watching a show, but as with great works of fiction. But in the last episode, there were a couple moments that really threw me out of it. And one of them was when none of the lessons that Bill McNew has or realizations that he's supposed to have made come into play. He marches into town, or I guess he really more sneaks into town, I guess. Not like you don't really see him sneaking, but he goes into town unnoticed. And he stumbles upon Whitey, and he's like, "Oh, this is sad. I'm sorry this happened to you, kid." And then he just strolls out into the middle of the street, and there's this massive gunfight going on. And when Whitey tried to stroll out into the middle of the street, he got killed immediately. And to me, that was sort of a example of like, you can't be a hero in this world. Like this is a brutal world. You've got to be realistic. And he isn't. He just strolls out into the street in a way that would be what you would do if you wanted to have suicide by cop or whatever, right? Like this is basically like what could have happened earlier when Frank Griffin interacted with him. Is like, do you want to die, son? Is that what you want? That's kind of what it seems like he's doing. He just walks right up to them. They see him and they just look at each other. And then that's when Roy Good comes into frame and I guess kind of diffuses that situation. But I hated that scene. Like the good part about the scene, and that hasn't happened yet. I think in the next bit after Roy Good appears, he looks down and sees he has a really long shadow, and that was great. That was a great moment. But I hated the scene where he just walks up to them and looks at them.
Yeah, I mean, and I get it. That did not bother me. I think it just works so much thematically for me that the real worldness of it just did not bother me at all. I love that, like, yes, he is approaching them in a very similar way that he did in the creek, but this time he has the entire town with him. This time he's standing in the streets of his town. He's doing his job. He is Sheriff of LaBelle once again, standing here to defend his town. And I think that is fundamentally different. It's not death with no purpose. It's death to defend his town.
Right. And he doesn't even die.
Yeah, you're right. But, he does not. And I think a large reason of possibly, if you're trying to really bend yourself around to get to a place where why didn't he die here? Roy Good showing up kind of throws that all into craziness. But yeah, I mean, I understand, and that's one of the places where it does absolutely fall into the Western tropes. You have him standing there, even the shadow, which is something that like is used so much in Westerns, the long shadows by the sun when people stand and face each other man to man, is something used in Westerns at all. And I think it's a testament to the show that it took that and made it a theme to something, that it took that trope and made it thematically relevant. But I mean, I get what you mean. I guess my only thing is that it didn't do anything for me other than, oh, this is cool.
Right. I mean, the movie is constantly dancing around these Western tropes that in most situations I feel it takes just far enough. And here I felt it went over the line into kind of like shattered the realism of the thing. But that was just where the line was for me.
Maybe it was just because I was like losing my mind at the fact that the final gunfight of the show is a bunch of women like in a house like shooting the shit out of these outlaws. I loved it.
And that was great.
Yeah.
I like how they had the plan to be in the hotel, which they established earlier was made out of brick and steel.
Yeah, yeah.
And a great scene that a great there was a lot of consciousness in the writing of the script to make it unified, obviously.
Yeah, the right
that's
like I think we've stressed that a lot, but the writing is really solid.
It's really solid. Everything's connected and purposeful.
Yeah.
There's no scene that is pointless.
Yeah. We haven't talked much about the direction, because he also directed it, Scott Frank, and it's very well done. I think, like, you can tell when he's taken stuff like the scene that everyone knows from The Searchers, when John Wayne walks up to the door at the end of it and then turns around and walks away because he's not part of that world. I think Scott Frank literally copies that scene. I can't remember exactly when it happens, but I did remember seeing it. And so, like, he uses a lot of old Western imagery. A lot of the horse work is crazy. Like, I listened to an interview with Jeff Daniels where he almost died while doing some of the horse stunts, because there was like a line of bushes in front of where he was riding, and there were two trucks on either side of him, so he couldn't move, and he literally just had to bail off his horse and risk getting trampled. Like, the stunt work is crazy good.
It is, and actually that's something I noticed when watching like The Searchers and Shane as well. is like, you wouldn't necessarily like think that stunt work would be that good back then, but there's like scenes where Ethan's adopted nephew is like hanging off of his horse and like trying to stop him, and then he like falls, and it's like, oh god, like he almost got his face kicked in by that horse.
There's a scene where someone gets trampled. I don't know if you saw it, but like when the Indians are running across the river, one of them, the guy falls off his horse and the horse falls down, and another horse runs over it. And I don't know if anyone got hurt or what happened there, but I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's probably... Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it just popped out. Like, this seems like really negligent. Directing, like, oh my god, all of these people could have died here.
Yeah. And of course, like, in modern filmmaking, there's a lot more safety with that. So
yeah, it would never happen. It'd be dedicated stunt people, or it'd be CGI or something.
But you could tell it was, like, there's even scenes where they're just, like, galloping up steep slopes, and you can see... in Searchers that, like, the horse almost loses it. They, like, almost lose their traction and fall. And I'm just like, oh my god. Like, every time they're galloping on horses, like, someone is about to die.
Right.
So, which is crazy to think about now, because one of the reasons why Westerns were so popular back then is because they were so cheap to make. Because you could really just go out in the desert outside of Hollywood and shoot a Western. Because there's just...
Right, yeah.
And, like,
you just need to build, like, one building for the town.
Right. But that's because there was just none of the safety requirements and people needed there, because nowadays horse work is so expensive because you need like 2 ambulances for every horse or something ridiculous. But yeah, it's crazy.
The settings were really good in Godless.
They were, yeah.
And like they were limited. Like, there were a couple, like, major settings that you really got the feel of, and it really felt like a town.
And, like, one of the things that Shane is most well known for is its really wide shot, like, environment shoots where you see, like, the beauty of this wilderness. And Godless did that a lot, too. Like, I think the entire last, like, 3 minutes of this show is Roy Good riding to California, and you have these beautiful, beautiful wide shots of the environment as he traverses the West, and that made me think of Shane a lot too.
Yeah, and they use it to good effect to show kind of like the untamed wilderness.
Right.
And I gotta feel, I mean, I know, like, in Shane the town was much smaller. Like, it was barely even a town. Like, in Shane it was all like settlers, and then there was like a store. And that was like the whole town. So it felt super isolated. And Godless feels more connected, I think, as like a wild civilization that's kind of already there, but like still the town is isolated, but it is a proper town. And, and there's like these great locations like Blackdom and Alice Fletcher's ranch. And
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the strengths of the show, really, besides the writing, is it feels like a town. Like, it feels like you have these different locations, you have the stuff on the outskirts, you have the stuff in it. it's a mining town, so it's all centered around the mine, except the mine doesn't run anymore. So
Right.
you get the feeling of this dead town. It's barely hanging on. One of the things that I liked most about the imagery is the church being constructed, and that's something that's just like slowly over the course of the show we're seeing these women work to build the church, because there's no men left to do it, and it's like slow progress, but they're slowly making progress.
Yeah, and it mirrors the title of the show.
Right.
It's like the town is godless because there's no church.
Yeah.
And then at the end, the preacher finally shows up, which was another great thing.
Right, it was so perfect. It's like they've been
introduced.
waiting for the preacher the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, this is godless land. There's no God here. Where's the preacher? And then at the end, he shows up. It's perfect.
Yeah, and it's implied that like he's not coming because they got his last letter like 6 months ago.
Right.
And it's like, oh yeah, he's clearly died.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was a cool moment at the end when he shows up for the funeral.
Yeah. Lovely show. I think top 5 of the shows for the year for me. I really enjoyed it. It reminded me what I like so much about Westerns when they're done really, really well.
Yeah, I think this is my favorite Western.
Oh, wow. Wow. I still like, and I know we've been comparing it favorably to Shane and the Searchers in pointing out the things that we think have been done better. But I just want to say I really loved those movies too. The Searchers continues to fascinate me with the stuff that movie did. I think John Ford is brilliant, and I loved that movie very much.
I mean, there are still things I appreciate about them, but I think less so for me. They don't hold up as well. Like there were a lot of sort of like corny elements to them that it's harder for me to get over now than it used to be. And I liked Godless because it was it brought these movies up to speed. It showed what they can be and sort of with today's expectations.
Yeah, I get that. The Searchers is like, there's a movie, Bone Tomahawk, that came out 2 years ago that's basically The Searchers updated, except it's super violent. Basically, Indians take a couple people from this family prisoner, and the sheriff rounds up a posse to go after them, and they chase down the Indians, and it's violent and bloody and kind of great.
I never saw that one. I mean, I've seen some of the modern attempts at Westerns, like 310 to Yuma was like, 10 years ago or something.
Yeah,
that was fairly
that's a remake, though.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I guess it was. I was fairly underwhelmed by it, but it still, like, as a remake, like, the goal is to kind of tell it to modern audiences.
Yeah. Check out Bone Tomahawk. I think it's on Amazon for free. It's Kurt Russell is the lead, and with a beautiful, beautiful Kurt Russell beard. It's really great. It is very much it kind of shifts into horror near the end of it, just when they get to where the Indians are and the fighting that goes on there. It's very regressive as far as its treatment of Native Americans. It tries to get over that by saying they're not true Native Americans. They're this weird offset tribe that has basically become fully animalistic and uses that as an excuse to just mercilessly kill these people. Mm-hmm. But it's very well done. Some of the best parts of it are just scenes between the 4 people in this posse, like around a fire at night as they're journeying to catch up with these Indians. It's pretty good.
Gotcha. Did you see Deadwood? Did you watch Deadwood?
I've never watched Deadwood, and that's really embarrassing. It's been on my list for a while, and I just haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah, I mean, I watched episodes off and on of that back when it was still on. But I know it got a lot of accolades, and there were some interesting characters in it. But that I felt was too serialized. Like it didn't have a point. It was too episodic, and it wasn't episodic enough in that there wasn't like a central thing to each episode. But it wasn't a long form narrative enough that there was stuff holding it together. I just felt like each episode was kind of like just a day in the town.
Yeah. So kind of like The Wire of Westerns.
Yeah, and Godless was much tighter, and I appreciate more tight narratives. So I think for me, Godless is like the only modern interpretation of a Western that has really succeeded, which is why I'm so excited about it.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that's Godless on Netflix. It is a limited series, so they might announce a sequel. I really hope they don't. I hope this is just a one and done type thing. But you can check it out on Netflix. It's 7 episodes. It's about 8 hours long, though, because some of the episodes go over an hour. That's one of the weird things with Netflix is that there's no uniform length anymore. Like some are an hour and 10 minutes, some are 50 minutes.
It was really weird because, I'd be watching it, be like, this has been going on for a while. And it was like almost an hour and a half. And then I'd be like, well, I've got, exactly an hour here between things. I'm going to watch an episode. And then it'd be like a 40-minute episode.
Yeah. I wonder how they make those marks, right? Because it's basically meaningless in a show that's a continuous story this.
I mean, I think they made them well because they tried to make each episode kind of have its own sub-arc.
Yeah, that's true. It did use the serialized nature as well as it could. Yeah.
And honestly, it's a better way to do it. It's better to make delineations like where sub-arcs stop than just like edit it into equal hour segments.
I agree. Yeah. All right, so that's Godless on Netflix now. Check it out. If you listen to this whole conversation and haven't seen the show, I'm sorry because we just ruined it all, but
I mean, it's still enjoyable.
I completely agree. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to what we've been watching and wrap this thing up. Michael, I think you have an end to a thought that you had last week.
I haven't watched anything else this week because I watched Godless, which was 7 episodes, and then I watched those 2 Westerns again. But during last week's podcast, I was in the middle of watching The Tunnel, which is a South Korean kind of survival story, which I at the time recommended and still recommend. It was there were some really good narrative devices that I think they used to make the survival story more interesting, because it's about this man who's driving in a tunnel and the tunnel collapses on him and he's like trapped in his car. But they keep doing things to kind of open up the world a little bit. Like he's not just trapped in his car under the rubble the whole time. Like at some point, like he realizes that there's a little bit of tunnel he can escape to and get to another car. And then like at some point he finds like a little drip of water and just like little things that kind of like open up his little survival world that keep the show moving instead of just feeling like it's retreading the same, like we're going to get you out of there ideas. And there's good things that are happening outside of the tunnel, like with the rescue people, that also add to the story. So I think it did a genre that can feel pointless over an hour and a half period, and like did a good job with it.
Cool. Awesome. I did not have to rewatch Godless, so I watched another show. I watched a new show on Amazon Prime called The Marvelous Mrs. Mazal. This is a 8-episode show on Amazon by Amy Sherman Palladino. I don't know if you know who that is, Michael.
I don't.
That is the writer, showrunner, creator of Gilmore Girls.
Okay.
So you kind of hear that, and if you've watched Gilmore Girls before, you kind of know what you're going to get with the show. It is very fast-talking, dialogue-heavy, very funny type of humor. Did I just say very funny type of humor? That's ridiculous. Anyway, the conceit of the show is it surrounds a 26-year-old Jewish woman living in New York City with her husband. Her husband works in an office but wants to be a stand-up comedian, so she is like helping him with the stand-up comedy, and he's like really, really bad at it. And then he suddenly one day, after he has a particularly bad night where he bombs, he decides to come clean with his wife that he's been having an affair with his secretary, and he's leaving her, and she gets really pissed off, gets really drunk, heads back to the comedy house and gets up on stage and kills, like just ranting about her husband. Like she has a great performance and kills. And so part of her attempt to redefine herself, she decides she's going to be a stand-up comedian, and the woman who runs the bar kind of takes her under her wing and coaches her towards that. So it's this very funny look at, being someone who is in a failing marriage in the 50s and what that looks like when you're in a family that very much concerned with you being married. It's a very interesting look at how stand-up comedy works. It's a very interesting look at how women in stand-up comedy works. It's a very funny show. It's filled with a lot of heart. The performances are really wonderful. I really liked the show a lot. And if you like Gilmore Girls, you're going to love it. If you've never seen Gilmore Girls, I think there's still something here for you.
Cool. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it was one of those. So you know how Netflix does, or not Netflix. Why can't I think of it? Amazon Prime has their pilot season where they release like 3 episodes,
Gotcha.
or an episode of 3 different shows, and they say everyone watch these and tell us if you like them, and if enough people watch and have positive things to say about them, they will order full series. So that's what they did. So I saw the first episode of this a while ago, and then finally got to see the whole thing that came out last week.
I didn't know they did that actually, but that's a cool model.
Yeah, they do. That's what they did. I think this was part of the same group as The Tick, which got picked up and has come out, and I actually quite like their version of The Tick. And then Jean-Claude Van Johnson, which is a show about Jean-Claude Van Damme, where he's actually a spy, and all his movies have just been his cover as he is.
That makes sense. Why else would those movies have been made?
The first episode, that show has not come out yet, but the first episode is hilarious.
Speaking of Amazon Prime, is there a 3rd season of Man in the High Castle coming out soon?
I don't know. I have not watched that show.
Oh, you've never watched that show?
No, it's been on my list for a while, but I've just not gotten around to.
I'd recommend it. It's pretty cool experience.
Okay. So yeah, I guess the lead of The Marvelous Mrs. Mazal is Rachel Brosnahan, who is in House of Cards. I don't remember what her role was in House of Cards, but she was in House of Cards.
Okay.
She's great. I listened to an interview with her, and she had never done stand-up before. So this was a learning experience for her, but her performance is really wonderful. I love this show so much. It's just fun, and it makes you happy, and I think it's worth taking the 8 hours to watch it.
Awesome.
All right, so that's it. That's all we have for this week. If you have any questions about anything that we talked about, or just want to comment and let us know if we were too mean to Shane or Godless or the Searchers, or too nice. I don't think we criticized very much this week. I know. I think it is a very positive week of podcasting. Just reach out to us via email at dailyplanetfilms@gmail.com or on Twitter at dailyplanetfilms.
If you're not already subscribed to this podcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else that podcasts can be found.
That's right, Michael. And if you like this show and any of the other shows we do here, consider becoming a patron of the Daily Planet. You can pledge $1 a month or whatever else you can afford to help ensure we keep growing and keep making new content. There's also tons of patron-exclusive content and rewards for the people that support us. So go check us out at patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms.
And if you like what you heard, please consider rating us and reviewing us on iTunes. Every review helps us get more exposure to introduce new people.
Yeah. I think we're planning a hunt. We're getting near the end of the year, Michael, but we're planning a bunch of new things for next year. So it's a very exciting time for us. So stay tuned for all the different things we're going to do next week on the podcast. I still haven't locked down what we're doing yet. We had a slow movie week this week, so we looked at a Netflix show. I think we got some movies coming out next week, Michael. I don't know if they're coming out in your neck of the woods, but we'll figure it out. We'll be back next week with a new episode, so stay tuned.
The podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just